She was just a grocery store clerk on an ordinary shift, until a barefoot little girl wandered into her life, silent, lost, and holding a stuffed bear. What Emily Hart didn't know was that the child belonged to one of the wealthiest men in the country, and that someone close to him never wanted the girl found. What begins as an act of kindness quickly unravels into a web of secrets, betrayal, and redemption, where the price of truth is everything, and love might just be the most unexpected reward of all. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The soft hum of the refrigeration units and the rhythmic squeak of grocery cart wheels formed a familiar soundtrack in Maple Mart, the neighborhood's modest grocery store nestled on the edge of the city. Emily Hart stood behind the register, fingers flying across the keys, bagging items with practiced ease. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and a name tag pinned to her chest read Emily, happy to help, in bold, cheerful font that belied the fatigue in her eyes. It was a typical Saturday afternoon. Parents bustling through with children in tow, elderly couples checking prices on cereal boxes, and teenagers raiding the snack aisle. The scent of fresh bread from the in-store bakery mingled with the tang of citrus in the produce section. Outside, clouds loomed low, threatening a summer rain, and the wind occasionally whispered through the automatic doors. Emily glanced up from her register as a bell above the entrance chimed. But instead of the usual customer, her eyes locked on something strange, a small figure on the sidewalk, just beyond the glass doors. She blinked. A little girl, no more than 3 years old, stood there barefoot on the concrete, her tiny hands clutching a worn teddy bear. Her dress was wrinkled, her curly hair tangled. She wasn't crying, but her eyes scanned the parking lot with silent desperation. No adult was in sight. Emily's heart thudded. She stepped out from behind the counter. "Hey, Marcy," she called to her coworker, a middle-aged woman restocking candy bars. "Cover the register for a sec?" Marcy gave her a puzzled nod. Emily moved quickly through the automatic doors, the warm air brushing her face as she approached the child. "Hi there," she said gently, crouching to the girl's level. "Are you lost?" The little girl looked at her, wide-eyed, but said nothing. Emily softened her voice even more. "My name is Emily. Are you here with your mommy or daddy?" The child's lip trembled, and she shook her head. "Okay," Emily said, glancing around the lot again, still empty, save for a few parked cars. "Do you know your name, sweetheart?" The girl clutched the teddy bear tighter and murmured one word. "Lila." Emily's chest tightened. "Lila, that's a pretty name. How about we go inside, and I'll help you find your parents?" But Lila didn't move. Her legs were dirty, as though she'd been walking a while. Emily reached out slowly. "Can I carry you? It's warm inside. You'll be safe with me." After a long pause, Lila nodded. Emily scooped her up carefully, feeling how light she was, how cold her fingers felt despite the warm afternoon. She brought her into the store, ignoring the curious stares from customers, and led Lila to the break room behind the stock shelves. She offered her a juice box from the fridge and sat with her on the worn couch. "Do you know where you live?" Emily asked, handing her a paper napkin. Lila shook her head. "I want Daddy." "Okay, honey," Emily said. "We'll find Daddy." She tried calling the local precinct to report a found child, but the line was busy. Emily didn't want to call emergency services yet. Maybe a frantic parent was about to walk through the doors. She searched recent news alerts for missing child reports. Nothing matched. Lila was too young to give a phone number or a full address. By closing time, no one had come looking. Emily's concern grew into protective resolve. She clocked out and carefully wrapped Lila's small hand in her own. The girl looked up at her with quiet trust. "Let's go home for now, okay?" Emily lived in a modest second-floor apartment above a laundromat. She cooked a small dinner, mac and cheese and applesauce. Lila ate slowly but without hesitation. Afterward, Emily drew a warm bath, letting Lila play with soap bubbles as she gently washed the day's dirt from her skin. Once clean and dressed in one of Emily's oversized t-shirts, Lila curled up on the couch with her bear, eyelids drooping. Emily watched her for a long time, thinking of how vulnerable a child that small was. How easily she could have wandered into danger. The thought made her stomach twist. Who would leave a child like this? Or had something worse happened? She set up a makeshift bed on the couch beside Lila and sat up most of the night watching over her, mind racing. There was only one thing she knew for sure. Tomorrow, she would take the girl to the police station. And somehow, she would find her way back home. Morning crept into Emily's apartment with a gentle gold haze filtering through the threadbare curtains. The faint sound of birds chirping outside mixed with the rumble of a delivery truck pulling up to the laundromat below. Emily stirred on the couch, her neck sore and body stiff from sleeping upright. For a moment, she forgot the events of the day before, until she heard a soft rustling. She opened her eyes. There, curled up under a blanket, lay Lila, her tiny form still holding the teddy bear tight to her chest. Her cheeks were flushed with sleep, her lips slightly parted. The girl looked peaceful, fragile, and heartbreakingly small in a world too large and too cruel. Emily sat up slowly, careful not to wake her, and padded into the kitchen. She put on a pot of coffee and pulled out a small container of yogurt and a banana for Lila. The kitchen was quiet except for the slow drip of the coffee maker and the distant hum of the city stirring to life. As the apartment filled with the warm aroma of brewing coffee, she felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't a parent. She was just a grocery store clerk with a sick grandmother, bills stacked on her table, and barely enough savings to get by. But none of that mattered right now. This child needed help. She peeked back into the living room. Lila was awake now, blinking sleepily, her teddy still tucked under one arm. "Good morning," Emily said softly, crouching beside her. "Did you sleep okay?" Lila nodded and rubbed her eyes. "You stayed." Emily smiled. "Of course I did. You hungry?" Another nod. Emily carried her to the table and set her in a cushioned chair. She peeled the banana and opened the yogurt, watching as Lila cautiously dipped a plastic spoon in and began to eat. Between spoonfuls, she asked softly, "Do you remember your daddy's name?" Lila shook her head. "Do you know what city you live in?" Again, silence. Emily didn't press. The child was clearly still in shock, quiet, withdrawn, but not unresponsive. She'd been through something, that much was certain. After breakfast, Emily helped her get cleaned up again and changed her into another oversized t-shirt she'd tied at the waist with a soft ribbon. She brushed Lila's curls as gently as she could, wincing every time the brush caught a tangle. Lila never cried, only winced once or twice, then endured the rest in silence. By 9 a.m., Emily had packed her bag with a snack, wipes, and a sweater for Lila. She pulled on her sneakers and double-checked that she had her phone, ID, and the grocery store receipt with the time and date, just in case she needed proof of where and when she found the girl. She knelt in front of Lila, zipped her borrowed hoodie up to her chin, and looked into her eyes. "We're going to the police station now, okay? They're going to help us find your daddy." Lila hesitated. "Will they be nice?" Emily gave her a warm smile. "Yes, sweetheart. And I'll be with you the whole time." The police station was a 20-minute bus ride into the city. Emily kept a firm grip on Lila's hand the whole way. She sat the girl beside her, shielding her from strangers' curious glances and occasional smiles. A young woman nearby offered her a sticker from her planner, and Lila accepted it shyly, sticking it on her teddy's foot. Once they arrived, Emily took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the 14th precinct. The front desk officer looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Emily said, lifting Lila into her arms. "I think I found a missing child." That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. Within minutes, they were taken into a private room. A female officer knelt beside Lila and offered her juice and crayons while Emily explained everything. The grocery store, the wandering child, the sleepless night, the fruitless attempts to find her identity. Detectives came in. More questions followed. How did the child behave last night? Did she say any names? Any vehicles you saw near the store? Emily answered everything as best she could, anxiety beginning to bloom in her chest. What if they thought she had done something wrong? What if she'd mishandled this? But every officer she met treated her with calm professionalism and clear relief. She could tell they were grateful she had brought the child in unharmed. About an hour into the process, a detective stepped into the room holding a file folder and a tight expression. "We've identified her," he said. Emily's heart jumped. "Really?" He nodded. "Her name is Lila Kensington." He paused. "She's the daughter of Alexander Kensington." Emily blinked, confused for a moment. The name sounded familiar. And then it hit her. Alexander Kensington, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Kensington Dynamics, the tech giant that made everything from smart cars to security software. His face was rarely in the press, but his company was always in the news. And now this little girl, this sweet, quiet child, was his daughter. "We've been coordinating with his security team," the detective continued. "She was reported missing 2 days ago. Her disappearance was kept quiet. Only a few trusted people knew. We believe it was an attempted abduction." Emily's stomach dropped. "My God, he's on his way now," the detective said. Emily turned to look at Lila. She was sitting on the floor drawing with a pink crayon, a little smile returning to her face. She had no idea the magnitude of the storm she'd been in. Within 20 minutes, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the hallway. A tall man with sharp features and a face lined with exhaustion rushed into the room. "Lila!" The girl looked up, eyes wide. "Daddy!" She ran into his arms, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. The man held her like a drowning man clinging to life itself. He buried his face in her curls, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Everyone in the room fell silent. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. It was the kind of reunion you only see in movies. Finally, the man looked up and turned his gaze on her. "You're the one who found her," he said, voice hoarse. Emily nodded quietly. She was outside the store. I couldn't leave her." He stepped forward and took her hand with both of his. His grip was firm but trembling. "You brought my daughter back to me. I don't have words, just thank you." Emily gave a soft smile, blinking back emotion. "She's a special little girl." He glanced down at Lila, who was clinging to his leg now, clearly unwilling to let him go again. "She really is." The sterile lights of the police precinct flickered faintly overhead as Alexander Kensington stood still, his designer coat hanging loosely on his lean frame, as if he had aged 10 years in just a few days. His grip on Lila didn't loosen. She clung to his collar, tiny fingers wrapped tightly around the fine fabric of his shirt, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Emily stood a few feet away, feeling awkward in her thrifted hoodie and faded jeans, her sneakers still damp from the puddles outside. She watched the way Alexander held his daughter, how his jaw clenched as he kissed the top of her head, how he seemed to inhale her presence like he was trying to breathe again. A female officer gently touched Alexander's arm. "Mr. Kensington, would you like a moment in private?" He nodded. "Please." Then he turned to Emily. Would you come too?" She hesitated, surprised. "Of course." They were ushered into a private interview room, but the interrogation table had been moved aside to make space. Alexander sat down in the armchair with Lila still in his arms. He looked at Emily with glassy eyes, his voice thick. "I don't even know your name." "Emily," she said softly. "Emily Hart." "Emily," he paused, as if trying to make sense of it. "You saved her. You don't even know what you've done for me." "I just did what anyone would do," she said, her voice small. She was alone. Scared. He shook his head. "No, not everyone would have done what you did. You didn't leave her. You didn't call the press. You didn't demand anything. You took care of her." Emily looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't know who she was. She reminded me of someone." Alexander nodded slowly, his gaze falling to Lila, who had finally started to doze off in his arms, her cheek pressed to his chest. "Her mother died giving birth to her," he said quietly. "It's always been the two of us." Emily's heart tugged. "I'm sorry." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've given her back to me." A knock sounded on the door. One of his security men, a tall, broad man in a dark suit with an earpiece, stepped inside and spoke low. "Sir, the car is ready. Media's still unaware. We've secured the rear exit." Alexander nodded, then looked back at Emily. "I want to thank you properly." "That's not necessary." "It is to me." She hesitated. "I'm just glad she's safe. She deserves to be home." He stood up, adjusting Lila gently in his arms. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. "This is my direct line. I want to make sure you're taken care of. I owe you more than I can say." Emily accepted the card reluctantly, fingers brushing his as she took it. She tucked it into her back pocket. "I don't need anything," she said. "Just, maybe let me know how she's doing." "I will," he said. "I promise." She followed him to the rear of the precinct, where a sleek black SUV idled by the curb, a driver already waiting. The air was cool outside, and the clouds had thickened, promising rain. Emily stood just behind the security team, watching as Alexander fastened Lila into the car seat with almost reverent care. Before stepping in, he turned back to Emily one last time. "You're a good person, Emily Hart. There aren't many of those left in the world." Then he got in, and the door closed behind him with a quiet finality. The SUV pulled away from the curb, taillights glowing red as it disappeared around the corner, leaving Emily standing alone beneath the gray sky. She stayed there for a long moment, unmoving, the echo of Lila's tiny voice and laughter lingering in her ears. When she finally turned to walk home, she felt the absence of the girl like a missing heartbeat. She hadn't expected to feel so connected, so shaken. She thought she'd feel relieved. But instead, she felt like something had been gently placed into her life only to be taken away again just as quickly. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet goodbye at the curb wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. A week had passed since Emily Hart had returned Lila Kensington to her father, and yet every night before she fell asleep, she thought of the little girl. How she had clutched her bear, how she whispered, "I want Daddy," and how she looked when she smiled through applesauce-smeared lips. Emily's apartment had returned to its usual quiet. Her grandmother, recovering from another mild respiratory flare-up, had finally been discharged from the hospital, and for the first time in months, the medical bills were not looming quite so menacingly. The reason was lying folded in an envelope on the table. Inside had been a letter from Alexander Kensington, hand-signed, along with a check that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. $50,000. "For your kindness, your humanity, and for saving the one thing that matters most to me. Please accept this as a small thank you. AK." Emily had stared at it for hours. She didn't want to cash it, but she did. Not out of greed, but necessity. It meant quitting her job at Maple Mart, paying down their mounting debts, and getting her grandmother a part-time nurse to relieve her constant stress. But the money wasn't what stuck with her. It was the visit that followed. 3 days after receiving the check, Alexander himself had come. It was early afternoon. Emily was in the kitchen folding laundry when a knock sounded at the door. Not the usual neighborly knock. This one was firm, composed. She opened the door and blinked. There he was. Tall, composed, and unshaven in a way that only looked elegant on a man like him. Alexander Kensington stood in her narrow hallway, flanked by a single security guard who remained by the stairs. "Mr. Kensington?" Emily stepped back instinctively. "Just Alexander," he said with a small smile. "I was nearby, thought I'd stop in. I hope it's not a bad time." "No. I mean, not at all." She moved aside. "Come in." He stepped inside the modest apartment. His eyes scanned the space, clean, small, lived in. A vase of tulips sat wilting on the windowsill. Family photos adorned the bookshelf. The scent of baked oatmeal lingered in the air. "This is nice," he said genuinely. "Homey." Emily laughed awkwardly. "It's not quite your style, I imagine." He looked at her, one brow raised. "You'd be surprised how much I miss real things." They sat across from each other in the living room, a mug of tea in each hand. Alexander glanced at the framed photo of an older woman in a rocking chair. "Your mother?" "My grandmother," Emily corrected. "She raised me. She's resting now upstairs. Been in and out of hospitals lately." He nodded, expression unreadable. After a moment, he leaned forward. "Lila's doing much better, by the way. She asks about you." Emily's heart fluttered. "She does. Every night before bed." He paused, then added softly, "You made her feel safe." That's not easy for someone so young after something so traumatic. Emily looked down at her tea. She's an amazing little girl. Strong. Alexander was quiet for a moment, Then his voice changed, lower, more deliberate. Emily, there's something I've been struggling with. I don't normally speak to outsiders about my personal life, but this isn't normal. She looked up, attentive. My wife, Veronica, she said she was taking Lila to her cousins for the weekend. I was in Singapore speaking at a conference. I spoke to Lila over video the night before she disappeared. And then nothing. The story changed. First, they got into an accident and lost track of her at the hospital. Then it was that she ran off in a park. None of it made sense. Emily's brows knitted. Have the police? They're investigating. Quietly. Her story keeps shifting, but there's no official proof yet. And Veronica, she's become evasive. Distant. His fingers clenched the mug tighter. I'm starting to think someone didn't want Lila found. Or at least not found too quickly. Emily sat back, stunned. You think she was? Taken. Hidden. Maybe to scare me. Maybe for leverage. But whoever had her, they didn't hold on to her for long. The implication hit her like a wave. Someone had orchestrated the disappearance, then dropped Lila off like lost luggage at the nearest public place. Her store. And Veronica? Emily asked carefully. She claims ignorance. But I know her. I know when she's lying. He paused. I don't say this lightly, but if she had anything to do with it, she'll be out of our lives for good. Silence settled between them. Outside, a city bus rattled past the building. Finally, Emily said quietly, What do you need from me? Alexander looked at her, not with expectation, but with something far more rare from a man used to control, vulnerability. I don't know, he admitted. You were the first person to see Lila after it happened. She spoke to you. If anything comes back to you, anything strange, she said, let me know. She nodded. Of course. And, he stood, brushing non-existent dust off his coat. I'd like to see you again. Not just for this. Emily looked at him, her heartbeat rising. I think Lila would like that too, he added with a faint smile. That night, after the door had closed behind him and the sound of his car faded into the evening, Emily sat in silence with her tea gone cold, replaying the visit in her mind. She had walked into the police station thinking she was returning a lost child to her father. She hadn't known she was stepping into a web of lies, power, and secrets. And she never expected that both the child and the man would become part of her life again. The storm arrived on a Wednesday evening, one of those sweeping, cinematic thunderstorms that drenched the city in minutes, washing everything in gray. Alexander Kensington stood alone in his penthouse study, staring out through floor-to-ceiling windows as sheets of rain streaked down the glass. Behind him, the room buzzed softly with surveillance footage playing on a muted screen. A faint glow from his laptop illuminated the mahogany desk, but his eyes weren't on the screen. They were fixed on the street far below. Lila had gone to bed hours ago, clutching her bear, after another bedtime story read by Emily, who had stopped by earlier that day. Emily had been stopping by more often, first at Alexander's invitation, then at Lila's insistence, and now simply because it had begun to feel normal. It had been nearly a month since Lila was found, and Alexander had grown used to Emily's quiet warmth in his home. She never overstepped. She never asked for anything. She came to read, to laugh with Lila, to cook occasionally in the vast, underused kitchen that had been more for show than function until she arrived. But now, a shadow hovered just beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. He turned away from the window as Lucas Brandt, his head of private security, stepped into the room. His raincoat dripped on the floor, and his jaw was clenched. You're not going to like this, Lucas said without preamble. Alexander crossed the room. Go on. Lucas pulled a flash drive from his jacket pocket and inserted it into the laptop. The screen shifted to a paused video still, a dark parking garage. He clicked play. Alexander watched as a silver SUV rolled into frame. That's the vehicle your wife used the night she claimed she and Lila stopped at the hospital, Lucas said. But this footage is from the building across town. An old private warehouse. No hospitals nearby. No traffic cameras in the area. This was a dead zone. Alexander narrowed his eyes. And Lucas froze the frame. Watch the passenger door. A man stepped out, then opened the back door. Another man appeared, taller, wearing gloves, and then, emerging slowly between them, was Lila. She looked groggy, limp. Alexander's entire body stiffened. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "They never went to a hospital," Lucas confirmed grimly. Veronica was there. She got out of the driver's side. She handed Lila to those men. She walked away without looking back. Alexander's face twisted with fury and disbelief. "She handed off my daughter like a parcel?" "We think they sedated Lila. She was likely asleep when Emily found her. Not just exhausted, drugged." Lucas clicked through photos, bringing up screenshots from several private cameras his team had tapped into. "We also traced financial records. A payment to one of the men in the footage. Offshore account, masked by a shell corporation. It ties back to an associate of Veronica's ex-boyfriend." Alexander's fists clenched. "She planned the kidnapping. She staged the whole thing." "It looks that way," Lucas said. "But we didn't get this from the police. We found it ourselves. So far, the official investigation is stalled. Veronica's playing innocent, and she's convincing to those who don't know her." Alexander turned, staring back at the window, but now the storm outside seemed internal, raging behind his eyes. "She played me," he muttered. "She risked Lila's life for what? Money? Power? Sympathy?" Lucas hesitated. "We believe she was trying to leverage fear. Possibly even set you up to be seen as negligent. Create a scenario where she's the grieving stepmother while you spiral." Alexander exhaled slowly, fury burning through him like a slow fire. "Where is she now?" "At the house in Southampton. She doesn't know we're on to her." "Not yet." "Then let her sleep peacefully tonight," Alexander said, voice cold. "It'll be her last night, doing so for a long time." The next morning, Emily received a call from Alexander. Not a text. Not a polite, measured message. It was his voice, tired, hoarse, and laced with something heavy. "Emily, can you come?" She didn't hesitate. Of course. When she arrived at the penthouse, Lila was playing quietly in the sunroom with blocks, the television murmuring cartoons in the background. Emily greeted her with a kiss on the forehead and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Alexander met Emily in the study. He didn't speak right away, just handed her a tablet. She sat slowly as she watched the same footage he had seen the night before. By the time the video ended, her hand was over her mouth. "She did this," Emily whispered. "She gave Lila to them?" Alexander nodded. "And lied to my face. Used her disappearance to draw me closer to her. To manipulate my attention, the media, the board. She didn't just betray me. She endangered my daughter." Emily looked down, trembling. "I had no idea. You weren't supposed to." He sat beside her, their knees nearly touching. "But Emily, I don't think Lila ended up at your store by chance." She looked at him, startled. "I think one of the kidnappers, got spooked. The surveillance crackdown, media alerts, heat from my team. They panicked. Dropped her somewhere public. Somewhere they wouldn't be seen leaving a child." Emily's eyes widened. "You think I was just in the right place?" "I think," he said, meeting her gaze, "you were in the only place she was truly safe." Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. "I've already filed the motion to freeze our joint accounts. Legal is preparing to file for divorce. And Lucas is working with federal agents to finalize the arrest. It's happening soon." Emily swallowed, her voice low. "Will Lila be okay?" Alexander's gaze softened. "She will. Because she has you." She stared at him, surprised. "Me? You're the one person she trusts besides me. You found her, held her, protected her, and you didn't ask for anything. You've stayed in her life. She lights up when you walk into the room. That's rare." Emily didn't know what to say. He reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. "This story is changing, Emily. And I'm not letting her grow up in lies. I want her surrounded by truth, and by people who love her." She looked down at their hands. And for the first time since she found Lila on the sidewalk outside Maple Mart, Emily Hart realized she was no longer on the outside of this story. She was at the heart of it. The wind off the Atlantic was sharp and biting that morning, slicing through the early light as if the sea itself were impatient. Waves rolled against the rocky shore of Southampton, their rhythm interrupted only by the distant sound of tires grinding into the gravel driveway of the Kensington Beach estate. The mansion stood like a monument of wealth and secrecy, glass, marble, and manicured perfection surrounded by silence. Inside, Veronica Kensington was sipping from a crystal flute of fresh orange juice, her silk robe fluttering with each lazy step through the house. She hummed to herself as she walked into the sunlit sitting room, her bare feet soft against the imported rug. She didn't know what was coming, but Alexander did. He stood outside the gates in the back seat of a black SUV, flanked by Lucas Brandt and 2 federal officers. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable behind his tinted sunglasses. His hand rested on a folder in his lap, a dossier of evidence, timelines, witness reports, wire transfers, and video footage, all leading to one undeniable conclusion. His wife had orchestrated the kidnapping of their daughter. This wasn't grief anymore. It was war. Inside the mansion, Veronica's phone buzzed. She picked it up, glancing at the name on the screen, Alexander. A flicker of annoyance passed through her face. Answering with a dramatic sigh, she said, "I hope this isn't another." "I'm outside," came his clipped voice. "Open the gate." She frowned. "You could have called ahead. I didn't come for tea." The line went dead. Within minutes, the massive front doors swung open, and Veronica stood in the doorway, face composed, features arranged in a perfect mask of surprise and concern. "Darling, what's all this?" Alexander didn't speak at first. He walked past her, motioning for the agents to stay back for now. Lucas followed, silent and imposing. In the grand foyer, with its glass chandelier and gleaming marble floors, Alexander turned to face her. "I know everything," he said. Veronica blinked, then laughed softly. "Everything about what?" "The kidnapping," he said, his voice calm and cold. "The handoff. The warehouse. The money transfers. The men you hired. The offshore accounts. I have it all." Her expression faltered, just slightly. "You're out of your mind." "No, Veronica. I'm finally clear." He tossed the folder onto the antique table between them. The photos spilled out first, Lila in the arms of masked men, Veronica behind the wheel. Security stills, wire logs, banking records, a complete trail of betrayal. Her face drained of color. "You betrayed your family," he continued. "You used Lila, put her in danger. For money? For control. You lied. To me. To the police. You cried on television, Veronica. You called her your angel, knowing exactly what you'd done." Veronica opened her mouth, tried to speak, but nothing came out. The federal agents stepped forward. "Veronica Kensington, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and fraud." One of them recited, pulling out the warrant. "You have the right to remain silent." "No," she cried, backing away. "This is insane." Alexander, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake." He didn't flinch. Veronica's voice turned desperate. "You don't have proof. That footage could be anyone. This is revenge because we were drifting. You just want Emily, don't you?" The name left her lips like venom. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "You tried to destroy my daughter's future. You have no right to speak about someone who saved her." Veronica was cuffed and let out, still shouting, her hair falling from its once pristine bun. Cameras flashed from a distance. Reporters had caught wind of the arrest. It would be front-page news by morning. And in the silence that followed her departure, Alexander stood alone in the marble foyer. For the first time in months, he could breathe. That evening, Emily sat in the living room of the penthouse, brushing Lila's damp curls while the girl munched on a grilled cheese sandwich. The soft glow of the sunset bathed the apartment in orange and pink. Lila turned her head sleepily. "Miss Emily?" "Yes, sweet pea." "Is Daddy mad at Mommy?" Emily paused. She set the brush down. "He's sad," she said gently. Because Mommy did something that wasn't safe. Lila was quiet for a while, looking at her sandwich. Will she come back? I don't think so, baby. Lila nodded solemnly, then leaned into Emily's side. I like it better when you're here. Emily wrapped her arms around her and kissed the top of her head. I'm not going anywhere. The door opened moments later, and Alexander walked in, Rain clinging to his coat. His eyes fell on them, his daughter curled in the lap of the woman who'd brought her home. He exhaled, not in weariness, in relief. Later, after Lila had been tucked in and the dishes were washed, Emily and Alexander stood side by side on the penthouse balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars. She's gone, he said quietly. Indicted. Bail denied. Emily looked at him. Do you feel better? No, he said. But I feel free. He glanced at her, eyes lingering on her face. Thank you. For being here. Not just for Lila, for me. Emily looked down, heart pounding. I didn't do anything special. You did everything, he said. Then silence settled between them again. But this time, it was full of promise. They didn't know where this road would lead. But one truth had been made clear. What began as a chance encounter had become something neither of them could deny. They were not just healing a child. They were beginning to heal each other. 2 years passed, not quickly, not without ache, but in small, transformative steps. What began in a grocery store aisle had grown into something unspoken, but undeniable. Emily Hart never returned to Maple Mart. The day she quit, she packed away her name tag and apron for good, leaving behind the fluorescent lights and cold tile floors for something warmer, deeper, a life she never could have imagined. She never moved into the Kensington estate. Not immediately. She declined Alexander's first offer to relocate her and her grandmother, insisting that the lines between gratitude and dependency remain clear. Instead, she built a steady rhythm. Morning visits, bedtime stories, weekly outings with Lila, and slow, consistent friendship with the man who once seemed like a stranger behind tinted windows. It was never romantic at first. At least, not obviously so. Alexander, in the wake of Veronica's arrest and divorce, threw himself into fatherhood. He was present, invested, gentle, never delegating the hard parts of parenting anymore. He was the one who packed Lila's preschool lunchboxes, who waited in the drop-off line, who sat crisscross applesauce on the carpet during story time. And Emily? She became Lila's lighthouse. She taught her to tie her shoes, to draw suns with smiling faces. She was there when Lila had her first nightmare and cried for her. Not for her father, but for Emily. She braided her hair before school concerts and kissed her cheek after scraped knees. There was one rainy afternoon when Lila fell asleep in Emily's lap on the couch. Alexander returned home late from a board meeting to find them curled up together beneath a blanket. Emily had one hand still tangled in Lila's curls, the other resting over the small of her back. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was soft, safe. He stood there watching them for minutes before stepping forward, covering them with another blanket and retreating into the quiet. That night, something shifted in him. He realized he didn't just admire her. He missed her when she wasn't there. The world eventually learned what Veronica had done. The trial was short but brutal. Media outlets replayed the footage, the betrayal, the sentencing. Alexander's silence throughout made headlines. But what wasn't public knowledge was who had filled the silence for him. Emily never asked for a label. She never asked for more than what he could give. But she gave every day. Pieces of herself. Moments of grace. Patience, laughter, stillness. One spring afternoon, Emily joined Alexander and Lila in the garden behind the estate. The cherry blossoms were in bloom, petals falling like snow onto the fresh green grass. Lila ran ahead in a pale blue dress, chasing butterflies. Emily followed behind, her hair loose for once, soft curls catching the breeze. You've made this place feel like home, Alexander said, walking beside her. She glanced at him. It's your home. Not before you, he said. They stopped under the old sycamore tree, Lila's favorite hiding spot. Its wide branches cradled the sky, casting dappled shadows across their feet. Alexander turned to her, his voice quiet but sure. "Emily, I used to believe I could never love again. After Claire, I locked every part of myself away. And after Veronica, I swore I'd never let someone that close." She looked at him, heart slowing. "I never asked you to." "I know," he said. "That's why I can say this now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not flashy, not ostentatious. He opened it. Inside sat a simple ring, a gold band with a single oval-cut diamond, elegant and honest. Lila, who had been hiding behind the tree giggling, poked her head out just in time to see him kneel. Emily gasped. "Alexander, I'm not asking you to replace her mother. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you already are. But Emily Hart, you've filled the cracks in this home with love and light and patience. You've given my daughter safety. You've given me hope." His eyes shone. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks before she could speak. She covered her mouth with one hand and nodded, then whispered, "Yes." Lila screamed with joy and ran toward them, arms outstretched, shouting, "Does this mean Miss Emily is going to live with us forever?" Emily pulled her into a hug, laughing through her tears. "Yes, baby. Forever." Alexander wrapped his arms around both of them, and for the first time since loss had etched itself into his life, he felt something he hadn't dared hope for. Wholeness. Not perfection. Not fairy tales. But healing. The engagement didn't make headlines. No press releases. No grand announcements. Just a quiet dinner. 3 place settings. Candlelight. And laughter echoing off the walls of a home once filled with silence. For them, that was enough. Because love hadn't arrived with fireworks. It had arrived with soft steps, whispered stories, bedtime songs, and grocery aisles. And now it bloomed quietly, beautifully, into something lasting. The chapel was small. Not grand, not gilded. Just the way Emily Hart wanted it. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting delicate gold patterns onto the pale stone floor. Ivy crept gently up the outer arches, and roses, soft pink and white, lined the aisle in quiet bloom. The scent of lavender mingled with sea breeze from the cliffs below. It was a spring morning kissed by early dew, and for the first time in a long while, there was no storm chasing them. Emily stood just beyond the doors, her breath held in her chest like a prayer. Her dress was not extravagant, silk, elegant, timeless. The veil rested lightly on her shoulders, pinned with a small pearl comb that had belonged to her grandmother, who now sat in the front row, wrapped in a shawl and smiling with damp eyes. A nurse waited close by, but her spirit, strong as ever, shone brightest today. Next to her sat Lila, now 5 years old, legs swinging beneath her soft satin dress, clutching her teddy bear with a tiny bouquet of daisies in her lap. She wore a flower crown and grinned every time someone glanced her way. When the doors opened, the music began, not a grand orchestral fanfare, but a simple piano melody, soft and clear. Emily stepped into the light, her fingers trembling slightly around the bouquet. But her eyes never wavered. They were fixed on Alexander. He stood at the altar, not in a tuxedo, but a tailored suit that somehow made him look both regal and grounded. His eyes, they were steady, calm, full. The moment she reached him, he whispered, "You're stunning." And for the first time that morning, Emily breathed. The ceremony was brief, intimate. Only those who mattered filled the pews. No photographers, no media, no executives or shareholders. Just friends, quiet witnesses, and one little girl whose smile outshone every flower in the room. When the officiant said, "Do you take this woman?" Alexander's voice didn't shake. It didn't pause. "I do. In every lifetime, I do." And when Emily repeated her vows, her voice was firm. Her eyes glistened. "I choose you. Not because I have to, but because every part of me already belongs here, with you." When they kissed, Lila clapped so loudly the whole chapel laughed. Afterward, guests moved outside for the garden reception. Strings of soft lights swayed in the breeze, strung between flowering trees. Tables were arranged in simple clusters beneath open tents. It felt more like a homecoming than a wedding. Emily danced barefoot in the grass with Lila, her veil forgotten on a nearby chair. Lila twirled in circles, dizzy with joy, shouting, "We're a real family now." Alexander watched them from a distance, glass in hand, his heart full in ways he couldn't quite put into words. Not long ago, he had believed his life ended in the hospital room where Claire died. But then a woman with tired eyes and a soft voice had found his daughter wandering in fear and carried her into safety with nothing but her heart to guide her. That same heart now wore his ring. Later that evening, when the guests had left and the sky turned a rich indigo, they sat on the garden swing together. Lila had fallen asleep on a nearby lounge chair, her stuffed bear tucked beside her, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "I used to wonder," Emily whispered, "if any of it really mattered. All the hard days. The quiet ones. The ones where I felt invisible." He turned to her. "And now?" he asked. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Now I know every minute led here." Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded, worn receipt. He held it up between them, almost shy. It was the old grocery receipt from the day she found Lila. "I kept it," he said, "because it was the day everything changed. The day fate walked out of a store with my daughter." Emily stared at it, a laugh caught in her throat, tears warming her lashes. "That's ridiculous," she said softly. He smiled. "So was I. Until I met you." They sat in silence, wrapped in the hush of evening and the scent of garden roses. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes played a tune only the trees seemed to hear. And when Emily closed her eyes, she didn't see her old apartment, or the break room at Maple Mart, or stacks of medical bills. She saw Lila dancing in the sun. She saw Alexander, smiling at her like she was the miracle. She saw a life not made of wealth or accident, but of kindness, choice, and love. A life born in an aisle she once swept clean. A life she would never trade. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.